Okay, so now that you know a fair amount about the admissions process and about the academic index, let's cover some of the ways that you can increase your chances of being admitted to these top tier schools and specifically the Ivy League. So, we're going to cover the do's in this section, as in do's and don'ts. These are the do's, the things to do to increase your chances to be admitted. The first thing that I can tell you is to have the highest possible GPA that you can have. As we can see on that academic index, one of the main factors of that is your unweighted GPA. And so have as close to a 4.0 as possible. And I recognize fully that I am talking to many different athletes here, and some of you may already be seniors and you're taking this class, and there may not be much you can do to impact your GPA at this point. And so, all of these do's that I'm about to tell you are going to have a varying degree of your ability to adjust those factors. And so, recognize the things that you can't change between now and the time that you're going to be admitted to a university. Don't stress too much about those and focus on the things that you can control. Now, for the freshmen and sophomores who are taking this course, you got a lot of time to take care of all of these dues. But in any case, don't stress if I'm telling you something to do and you're not able to do it at this timeline in your recruiting process, because that's water under the bridge. So just like in track and field, you can't worry what happened on the last throw or the last jump, or you can't worry about getting tripped up in the race, or you can't worry about getting a less than ideal start. You need to maximize what you can do from here to the end of the race to give you the best outcomes, from here to the end of the competition to give you the best outcomes, from here to the end of the recruiting process to give you the best outcomes. So having a high GPA is of utmost importance. Without a slot, you'll need as close to a 4.0 unweighted GPA as possible. With a support slot or a recruiting slot, you'll more or less need to have over a 3.5 GPA unweighted, meaning an equal number of A's and B's. And likewise, you will need as few C's as possible. A C on your transcript is not a nail in the coffin, but it can be. So if you had a C your freshman year and your grades are trending better every year and you don't have any more C's later in your high school career, you're probably going to be okay. However, if you have really good grades your freshman year and you have okay grades your sophomore year, and then you have a few C's your junior year, you're probably not going to be admitted to the Ivy League. And really, what they're looking for is they're looking for great students who are showing positive trends. So students who are going to be admitted without a support slot are typically going to have close to straight A's all the way through their high school career. Okay, so they've been consistent great students. As a student athlete, if you struggle your freshman and your sophomore year to get a lot of A's, but your junior year you're kind of nailing it and getting a bunch of A's, that shows a trend in the right direction. And these colleges recognize that they're not going to be getting you as a freshman in high school. They're going to be getting you as a freshman in college. So what you do later in your high school academic career is a little more meaningful than what you do early on. But we're shooting for a 3.5 as a minimum. It is possible to be admitted with a lower GPA than that, but it's very few and far between that you're going to find that in track and field in the Ivy League. Our second do is very similar to having a high GPA, and that is to have a high class rank. And that's obviously associated exclusively with your GPA. While those are kind of one and the same, the class rank is meaningful from a slightly different perspective. So think about the fact that all these elite academic colleges actually care about the relationships that they have with high schools around the country. It's going to be more challenging for you to be admitted if you have a lower class rank. And the reason for that is, let's say you're ranked number 50 in your high school class. That high school might take some offense to number 50 in your high school class being admitted to an Ivy League school if a bunch of the top 10 in that high school were rejected. And so they like to keep some level of consistency in terms of admission with class rank as they can. And so having a higher class rank makes it easier for the university to say yes to you and know that they're not going to be tarnishing their relationship with some of these high schools. Our third do is to take the most rigorous class schedule that you can. And so, without a support slot, you're going to need to be taking the absolute most challenging courses that your high school has to offer. There's really no way around this. If your high school offers AP classes, you should be taking as many of them as possible as your schedule will allow. If your high school offers IB, you should be in the IB program. So that's incredibly important because while they're looking at your unweighted GPA, which is obviously regardless of what level of class you're in high school, they are also going to be taking into account how rigorous your course load is. So without a support slot, you're going to need to be taking the absolute most rigorous courses that you can. Now, with a support slot, there's a little more wiggle room. If your high school offers AP classes and you are not taking any AP classes, then you're going to be in trouble. And that's a big red flag for admissions. And you may be ruled out just because you have no AP classes. So they may not expect you to take every single AP class that you're capable of taking, but they are going to expect to see AP classes, particularly on your junior and senior transcript. So again, they're looking more at a trend. So if you're in kind of some honors classes your freshman year, sophomore year, and you're in a few AP classes your junior year and then a few your senior year, that's a pretty good looking trend that you're taking rigorous classes, you're interested in learning at a high level. And if you're doing well in those classes in high school, the university can expect you'll do well in their classes in college. There is an important caveat that I want to touch on here. If you are a recruited student athlete and you're hoping to get a support slot, if you go ahead and take all the AP classes you can possibly get your hands on, and that results in your GPA being significantly lower than it would be, then you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. Yes, your course rigor is higher, but your GPA is lower. And so therefore your academic index, your AI is going to be lower. And that's not really going to be worth it. What I would recommend is to take as many AP classes as you feel confident that you're going to be able to maintain good grades in. Because if you increase course rigor, but it's at the expense of your unweighted GPA, you are in trouble. Whereas if you increase rigor, but you're able to keep your GPA, that's the kind of sweet spot that you want to hit. I mean, that's going to be different for every student, but you really need to think about it and talk to some of the people that are maybe a year older than you in high school about how hard some of those classes are and be selective about the classes that you choose. If there's a teacher that is just super, super tough in that one AP class, like maybe AP chemistry just kicks everybody's butts, and the teacher is just really tough and doesn't really give good grades out, gives a lot of B's and C's. You need to be careful with that. And maybe you want to take AP physics or AP bio or another AP science class instead. Okay. When you're thinking about what AP classes or what high level classes should I take, and you're trying to do that balancing act of taking tough classes but also getting good grades, the rule of thumb that I would use is definitely take an AP or IB class or high level class in your high school that you are confident you're going to get an A in. Probably take your high school class, your high level high school class that you are confident you will get a B or better in, and do not take high level classes that you are concerned that you might get a C in. This brings us to our next do. Do have high standardized test scores. So without a support slot, you are extremely unlikely to be admitted to an Ivy League school with anything lower than a 31 ACT or 1400 SAT. And even at those numbers, you are at a very low chance of being admitted because the averages in the Ivy League are closer to 1500 or 33, 34 ACT than those numbers. But those are kind of a baseline. Now, I have seen students be admitted with lower marks than those, but they typically have pretty close to perfect GPAs and are at the very highest level in their class. So they might be in the top few in class rank. And that can be something that can help you overcome a less than hyperstellar test score like a 1400 or 31. If you are in the top few in your class, even if you have a 1400 SAT, you can be in the mix, especially if you bring any other interesting kind of aspects into your college application. The next very important do to cover when it comes to standardized testing is that do treat it like a skill, meaning you can get better at these things over time. So if you think of this as like a stagnant number that is like, I don't know, your IQ or something, you're going to be at a dramatic disadvantage to those people who think of this as a skill. These tests are skills. So you want to retake these things and practice as much as you're able to. Now, that's an easy thing for me to say. Did I do that myself? I practiced a little bit and I think I retook the SAT one time. But if I went back or if I was advising a student athlete like you, I would say practice for your first test, take your test, practice again, take it again, And don't just take one test, right? Take the SAT and take the ACT if money allows. If your parents will help you out or you are able to work extra time as a babysitter to take an extra test, do it. It's worth it. This can help open up doors for you because the ACT and the SAT are different things. They're both standardized tests, but the ACT tests more subject specific information. So one test may suit you better than the other, and it's important to find out which one that is. So once you've taken both tests, take a look at a simple conversion chart between SAT and ACT and see which score of your ACT or SAT is actually higher on the chart. And from that point, you kind of know which test to focus on. The next rule of thumb when you're talking about the ACT and SAT would be unless you have a 1540 SAT or a 35 ACT, I would recommend retaking it because I mean those numbers are plenty high for admission even without a support slot. But if you fall somewhere below that, it's worth retaking it. Now, if you're a superstar athlete who's getting scholarship offers at all kinds of top end Division 1 programs and you've got a 1450 SAT, the Ivy League is going to figure out a way to get you in. Like all the Ivy League schools are going to probably figure out a way to get you in because you're a super top tier athlete. They're going to push really hard to get you in. But if you're kind of a regular recruit for the Ivy League and you have a 1450 SAT, I would recommend taking it again because you might get a 1500 or a 1480 and anything is going to help you, right? Because that's one of the ways that you can increase your value is by having a higher AI. So at the end of the day, you want to beat out the other person who didn't do the extra work to increase their SAT or ACT or increase their AI. So if you are on the same playing field athletically as someone and you have a 1420 SAT and they have a 1450 SAT and they don't practice, but you practice and you get your 1420 up to a 1480, since you were on the same athletic playing field to begin with, you just leapfrogged them in value to the program because you just raised your AI. So it's something to consider. And because you're taking this course, I have to imagine that you're trying to leave no stone unturned in making yourself the best possible recruit that you can. And so that's what I would recommend is retake the test unless you've already achieved a 35 or 1540, 35 or 1540. So when it comes to the ACT and SAT with a support slot, what I would recommend is not reporting your test score if you got lower than a 1400 or a 31 ACT. And the reason for that is you can be admitted into the Ivy League without a test score, as we've covered before. Now, you will have to operate on that AI scale that ends at 221. But if you're below a 1400 or 31, your test score is probably not going to help you. Now, I've given you the knowledge actually to go through each of those AI charts and determine which chart you should be living on. Should you be living on the chart where you're using your SAT or ACT score or where you're not using your SAT or ACT score? I would recommend punching your numbers into both of those and seeing which one your AI is higher on. So if your AI is higher, but you're under that 1400 threshold that I just gave you, then you're probably better off using your test score. So whichever one gives you a higher AI. But the rule of thumb for me is if you're under a 1400, your AI is likely going to be better only using your GPA. And we covered that in the last section of this course. So check it for yourself, but that's the general rule of thumb. The next do on this list is to write a truly compelling essay. The importance of this can't be overstated because the essay is one of the first things that an admissions officer is going to read. And it's also one of the few things that really sprinkles in some personality into the application. So we've been talking about nuts and bolts up until this time, but your GPA and your AI and your test scores don't really say anything about who you are, just about what you've done academically. So, if you're an admissions officer at one of these extremely highly competitive universities and you're looking at hundreds or maybe thousands, and I mean, the whole admissions department might be looking at tens of thousands of applications for any given year, what differentiates between all these students that have great GPAs and test scores from any other students that have great GPAs and test scores? And one of the main things that really does differentiate between those who are going to be admitted and those who are not going to be admitted is the essay. So think of it as like the hook of a song, right? If a song doesn't have that catchy thing, that hook that keeps bringing you back, that melody that gets stuck in your head, it's probably not going to be a hit. So the essay is the hook, and everything else fills in around that. Another kind of way to think about this is the "you must be this tall to ride this ride" situation. So your AI, which is composed of your GPA and your test scores, is what makes you meet that standard of height to ride the ride at an amusement park. You must be this tall, and you go stand up and you see, are you tall enough to ride this ride? Your AI, so your GPA and your test scores, are determine whether or not you're tall enough to ride this ride. And that's whether you're good enough academically to get by at that university or have a chance of being admitted, but it's not necessarily the thing that determines whether you're going to be admitted or not. And that essay is the thing that's going to differentiate you. So when you're thinking about what am I going to write my essay about to be one of those people who differentiates themselves from all the other great students, I can't give you an answer on what specifically to write it about. But what I can tell you is you want to write it and have it be very personal. You want your essay to be something that only you could have written, something that really hits home about who you are and how you see the world. Or there are many different ways to approach it, but it's got to be personal to you. It couldn't just be something that like it's vague enough that you could interchange it with anybody else's college essay. That's not going to get the job done. Make sure that it's personal. You want the admissions officer who's reading your application to think, "Ooh, this one's interesting. I'm really getting a sense of this person," because as they look through the rest of your application, they're thinking, "Okay, this is Susie. Oh, I know Susie. I know something about Susie. She told me about herself." And they will see the rest of your application through a different light if you really tell them who you are and you have a really personalized essay. The next do on this list would be to research each university and their application requirements and recommendations. And when you see something listed as a requirement, you really should be hitting all of those requirements if you're serious about that school. And when you see things that are listed as recommendations for people applying to that school, you really should be hitting all of those recommendations if you're really interested in that school. And while the admissions department wants to keep their options open and not make everything a requirement, the vast majority of people who are admitted to the university are going to meet both the requirements and the recommendations. And you may even have coaches that tell you, "Oh, it's okay, you don't need to, you're fine where you are." And it may be true. You may be able to be admitted without hitting all of the recommendations of the university. But if you want to give yourself the best chance, if you're a freshman or a sophomore, and you're plenty ahead of time in advance to cross all of your T's and dot all of your I's, make sure that you hit every requirement and every recommendation. That's going to give you your best chance. Now, if there are certain recommendations that a university has that you can't meet, meaning you might be a senior now and you would have had to do it your junior year, there's nothing you can do about that. So all you can do is move forward from where you are. And again, it's a recommendation because you are able to be admitted without meeting that recommendation, but it's not going to help you if you're not meeting all those recommendations. So again, try to hit all those recommendations, and you certainly will need to hit those requirements. Okay, to give you an Ivy League example of something that is considered a recommendation, but when you're a coach that's living on the inside, it's much closer to a requirement than a recommendation. A great example of this would be the four core solids rule. So the Ivy League has determined that it's important to them that all high school students who will be attending the Ivy League should take four core solids their junior and senior year. And so, what that means, a core solid is a class in a classical academic subject. So, you're going to be pretty safe in the math, science, history, language, English, foreign language. You're going to be pretty good in all those areas, but there are some classes that you may consider a science that they may not consider a classical science. Examples of classes that will definitely count are geometry, algebra, trigonometry, calculus, chemistry, biology, physics, any history classes, any foreign language classes, English composition or English language. And while the Ivy League intends for this to be a standardized practice across the entire league, that doesn't mean that all admissions departments abide by this in the same way. And we've definitely seen that Certain schools care much less about the four core solids rules than others. And in my experience, there have been people who were taking three or sometimes even two core solids who certain Ivy admissions officers said, absolutely not. You need to change your class schedule. You do not have the necessary requirements to be admitted to the university. And then they end up on another Ivy League roster the next year. So that's another thing to keep in mind. If one coach tells you, well, you don't meet the requirements, it doesn't mean that that rule at another school isn't going to be a little squishier. So you want to try to have four core solids in your junior first semester, second semester, and your senior first semester and second semester. A lot of times when you're going through the admissions process with a coach and the admissions department at a school, which we're going to get deeper into that soon, that's coming up, as you're going through that process, they're oftentimes going to collect a lot of information. They're going to look at your transcript leading all the way through your junior year because a lot of recruiting happens right before the senior year. And they're also going to look at your class schedule for your senior year. So it's incredibly important that you have four core solids on your class schedule for your senior year, especially if you junior year has already passed and you didn't have four core solids. That's okay, but you're going to really need to have them on your first and your second semester of your senior year. Otherwise, you might run into some problems. Now, again, they may not be problems that can't be overcome, but at some universities, they will be problems that you can't overcome. So you want to try to do this in advance. Have your four core solids in the first and second semester of your senior year at a minimum, and hopefully also in your junior year. That would really help to smooth the process along. And then just a few examples of classes that I've found oftentimes don't count as core solids, and although you'd expect that they might, would be marine biology, engineering, creative writing, environmental and earth sciences. So things are starting to change a little bit. Environmental and earth sciences are being accepted as a core solid more frequently now, but some of those a little bit more niche areas within, the creative writing is within English and you would expect that that would count, but some universities are not going to count that as a core solid. And again, this core solid thing is mostly an Ivy League rule. But it's if you're interested in the Ivy League, it's something that you need to really pay attention to. And typically you can look on a university's website and they'll tell you what they count as a core solid. Our next do that we've got to cover is one of these do's that I think I alluded to a little bit earlier that you're not going to have a lot of control over. But again, you can't stress out on things that you can't control. You can only really try to optimize the things that you can control. So this do have a unique background that the Ivy League is particularly interested in. And what is a background that the Ivy League might be particularly interested in? One example might be a local public school applicant. So if you live close to this Ivy League university and you are a local public school applicant, that might be something that they'd be interested in. And so if you are a high class rank applicant from a local public school, that's probably going to help you. Another thing that might help you would be a first generation college student. If neither of your parents graduated from college, you will have an advantage in getting into an Ivy League school. Another background that Ivy League schools tend to favor would be students who come from public schools in areas where they don't get a lot of applicants from. So these tend to be rural or inner city areas that are not in the Northeast. Now, I've heard some crazy things about families from New York and Massachusetts moving to Ohio or Nebraska for the senior year or junior and senior year of high school in order to differentiate themselves. I think that's a little crazy because while the value of an Ivy League education is quite high, I don't know that it's worth tossing your life up in the air to try to maximize and optimize. But people are going to these lengths in order to make this happen, which is why it is so important to really optimize the things that you do have control over or the things that you're willing to try to exert control over. Another do that you're likely to have very little control over that could help increase your chances of being admitted would be a full pay applicant. And what I mean by that is don't require financial aid. If your parents are going to help you pay, or you're just not eligible for financial aid based on your own and your parents' income, then this could help you get admitted. Because while this may be a controversial statement, It would be very challenging to prove otherwise. And I say that because schools are all jockeying for their rankings, their national rankings. And one of the major factors in the national rank is the endowment size. And endowments grow in a lot of different ways. One of the ways is from donations from donors, investment growth, portfolio growth, but also the nuts and bolts of the yearly budget, which more or less is, money coming in and money going out. So how much money are you spending and how much money is coming in? And one of the big ways that money comes in every year is through tuition. So if every applicant that they accepted needed a full financial aid package, they would be getting very little tuition money. They'd be getting no tuition money, and their endowment growth would suffer, and therefore their rankings would suffer. So if you do not need financial aid, it will likely help you be admitted. Now, if you're hearing that and you do require financial aid, that might seem like doom and gloom, but it isn't necessarily, because a lot of people that may have a unique Ivy League background, a unique background that the Ivy League is interested in from more inner city or rural places, may also require financial aid. And there is no doubt in my mind that having a unique Ivy League background would outweigh the fact that you need financial aid. And again, it's not really something that you can control. We're going to try to focus on controlling what we can control and maximizing what we can control.